Hey, hockey fans, welcome to season 6 of Across the Pond. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It goes a long way in supporting the podcast. Before we get to today's episode, I want to give a huge thank you to Mr. Paul MacLean, Sunset Studio, for his continued commitment to making this podcast sound great. If you're in Hong Kong and you have a band looking for a place to rehearse or perhaps do a recording, Sunset Studio is the place for you. I'd also like to thank Letitia Bishop, who creates my social media content and YouTube videos. I'm back for the 6th year as title sponsor of the podcast, the China Hockey Group. The China Hockey Group is a family-oriented group of ice hockey leagues, training programs, and community initiatives geared at developing hockey in Hong Kong and Southeast Asia. From Learn to Skate and Learn to Play programs, the HKBN Island Leagues, semi-private elite skills training, the SCIHL, which is designed for adults of all skill levels, to their elite Greater Bay Lions programs, including the Greater Bay Hockey League and the Asia Super League. The China Hockey Group has a program for everyone. If you're looking for some new equipment or to get your skates sharpened, stop by the CHG showroom at Central, an exclusive retailer of Bauer and Warrior equipment. For more information about all their programs, visit ChinaHockeyGroup.com. That's ChinaHockeyGroup.com.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to season 6 of Across the Pond. I'm your host, Chris Ivany, and today is a very special day for me. And I'd like to take a moment before I get started just to say thank you to my family and friends and those of you who have been supporting me over the last 6 years. It's been an absolute roller coaster ride, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I'd like to thank former guest and friend Tara Sloan, because thanks to her, I have the honor of speaking to one of the most iconic figures in Canadian sports broadcasting history. With a career spanning over 3 decades, he's an 8-time Gemini Award winner due to his insightful commentary and engaging interviews. Perhaps most famously known for his role as host of Hockey Night in Canada and co-host of Coach's Corner alongside Don Cherry, but has covered everything from the Olympics and horse racing to Rogers' hometown hockey. He's a husband, referee, author, and hands down one of the best sportscasters on the planet. His passion for the game, combined with his genuine love for storytelling, has made him a beloved figure, and he is 100% on my Canadian Mount Rushmore of celebrities. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Ron MacLean.
I'm trying not to look so satisfied with myself, Chris. That's a beautiful introduction. And so I was saying, okay, get over yourself, Ron. Don't be grinning like a Cheshire cat. By the way, Tara Sloan, we were together last weekend. She performed. Dave Bedini has West End Phoenix, which is kind of like the Village Voice in New York or the Straits in Vancouver, a publication here dedicated to journalism in Toronto. And they had a concert, which I emceed, and Tara performed, and she sang Across the Universe, so almost across the pond, by the Beatles, and she was incredible. She loves Bowie. The theme of the night was future tense, so it was almost as if we're going to get rid of humans controlling the planet and allow someone else to give it a shot. And a lot of David Bowie music, a lot of there was Husker Du, a band I hadn't heard of. Do you know that band, Husker Du?
No, I don't.
Sort of a fast-paced, I wouldn't call it punk rock, but a band that emerged at one point in 1985. They had on the Village Voice 2 of the top 10 albums. Talking Heads were at #1. So that gives you kind of a sense of the music. But Jim Bryson, an artist out of Ottawa, performed a song by Husker Du called A Book About UFOs. And that was probably the highlight of the night, other than Tara. Tara was sensational, and she's back in Toronto, kind of handling 2 cities now. She'll do a lot of work in San Jose with the Sharks, and she's got XM satellite radio that she'll do here.
Yeah, Tara's an absolute multi-talented lady. Fantastic singer. I remember Joy Drop, hearing her songs on the radio as a kid, and also, her ability to interview people is amazing. Her work with the Sharks has been fantastic. Her new podcast, I just listened to the one with Paul Abdul the other day. I mean, she's quite the woman, and I really thank her for finally, for giving me this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, me too, Chris, to meet you.
Yeah. So, Ron, we're going to get to a few different connections that you and I have throughout this chat. And the very first one is our connection to Cape Breton, as your dad was born there. Your mom is from Iona. And tell me a little bit. I know you were born in Germany. What do you know? What do you love about Cape Breton Island?
Well, Dad was from just outside Sydney Mines, so kind of your neck of the
Yeah.
woods. Point of Coney is where Dad's
Hmm.
from. He was a foster child living out at the point at Point of Coney, and one of the first memories I have is of driving out to the home that he lived in. The MacLeans were the family that took him in. So he really wasn't a MacLean. His father was from Newfoundland and mom was from Cape Breton. It's a long woven story, but I don't even know that Dad understands it. But when we would drive out to the MacLean's residence right out at the point by a radar installation at Point of Coney, there was a shop that sold a soda pop called Iron Brew. I don't know if you ever heard
Yes.
of Iron. Yeah,
Oh
so it's
yeah,
like
Cape
Dr.
Breton.
Pepper. Yes,
Yep.
and that's a highlight that jumped out as soon as you said it. And then beyond that, just the penetrating storytelling of Cape Breton is what stands out. Every time I go back home, I feel inferior or inadequate as a journalist or a storyteller because it's just so second nature to the community to be a well-spoken and to be able to weave a story about changing a tire goes on for an hour, and it's really a
Yeah.
special gift that is sort of indigenous to the communities in Cape Breton. So that was nice. Obviously, the Brador region, Mom's Iona, the Highland Village, the Celtic Colors concert. I've never attended. They went every year while they were alive. Both are gone now. But um, so when I'm with artists from the area, Matt Mays and I were together at a Blue Rodeo show at the what they now call the Budweiser stage in Toronto. And Matt, I think he's always kind of felt that he's Dartmouth, but a little bit of his music is kind of inspired by the jigs and reels, even though he's a
Yeah.
rock and roller. So yeah, music and storytelling.
Yeah, you certainly hit the nail on the head there. We are certainly known for being a proud group with lots of good storytellers and music and musicians, and Celtic Colors is probably one of our claims to fame when it comes to music festivals. So, Ron, you actually, our second connection is Chester. I'm not sure how much time you spent there. I spent a year playing Junior B there when I was going to St. Mary's in Halifax. How long did you spend there, and what was your connection in Chester?
We were stationed with the Air Force. So Dad's Air Force, both mom and dad joined the military and the Air Force. And then it was mandatory at age 50 to get out. So Dad was nearing the end of his run when he was transferred to Mill Cove. CFS Mill Cove was closer to Hubbard's than to Chester.
Hmm.
But as fate would have it, my hockey would start in Chester at the Byrne Arena. So I would go down there with, we would carpool from our base at Mill Cove, and the drive was, I think, close to 30 minutes down to Chester for hockey. And I played
Hmm.
at that point both out and in net. Every other game I would play goal, and then I would play usually defense, but sometimes center. And just loved, as you know, there wasn't a ton of outdoor ice in the region. Once in a while, we'd get lucky and the ocean might freeze close to shore, or we might get a little bit of uh, ice outdoors. But most of my hockey playing in that window was 1968 to 70. Uh, I played indoor hockey and just grew to love the game. Followed my boyhood here was a guy named Jacques Plante, a goalie who played for Montreal, then came over to Toronto, and I was fascinated with his story. He used to knit to keep himself calm, and he wanted to wear a toque actually in games. And Toe Blake, his coach, says, "You can't wear a toque. If it falls off, you'll end up reaching for it and you'll be distracted." He was the first guy to signal to his defensemen that there was an impending icing. He would put his arm in the air to warn them. He was really the first guy to wander from the net and play the puck. Just extremely innovative at the position. Had a book called Goaltending, which I purchased. I actually wrote him a letter, and he wrote me
Hmm.
back, which was amazing. And I asked him why he and Toe Blake disagreed about even wearing the mask, because he was the guy to popularize wearing masks.
Hmm.
Fascinating. But that's my sort of time in Chester and the whole area, Lunenburg, Mahone Bay. I don't have to tell you, is one of the prettiest places on
Yeah.
earth, and just really lucky to have had that point in my education and my hockey centered at Chester.
So your dad was in the military. Was that kind of the first move into Canada, and then you moved to a few different
No,
places after that?
so I'm born in Germany, which is a funny one because we were really stationed at Metz, France, but I was breech in the womb, so they had to spin me,
Okay.
and they didn't feel confident in the doctors or the equipment at Metz at the base, so they took me into Zweibrücken, which was also an Air Force installation, just on the other side of the border, and I was born there. We lived in France till I was 2, came to Goresbrook, came to Halifax. and that was for about 2 years. Then out to Victoria, then up to Whitehorse, Yukon for 5 years, which was that's where I started to skate outdoors, and fell in love with hockey first, and then to Chester, and then to Edmonton, and then finally to Red Deer. So within those first 10 years, we were nomadic. But
Right.
you know from your traveling, there's nothing like that to sort of give you a perspective on the oneness of us. We have our, in the case of Canada, we're fisheries to grain elevators to, whatever. But at core, we're hockey loving and, just another decent human trying to make a go of it.
And what was that? How did you kind of handle all that as a kid moving around a lot? Did it affect you, your life in general, your friendships, your hockey career? How did you handle that?
Yeah, when you get uprooted, it's traumatic. And the last move was the most traumatic of all to Red Deer because we didn't go to a base. Normally, I was in what they call public married quarters, and you were surrounded by like-minded, folks with the same experience, and were quick to knit together as a community or a society. But when you moved into the private sector, I mean, it was extremely lonely the first summer, the summer of '71 in Red Deer. And that's probably the only time I was like, I don't think if it was clinical depression, but I was really, kind of cocooning in my bedroom. I was an only child and I knew nobody and without siblings. That was a difficult summer, I remember. But as soon as school started and hockey started, more important,
Yeah.
then you're back in a network of friends. And I say that the moving gave me, balance in my life in terms of, okay, Red Deer thinks it's the greatest place on earth, and so did Chester, and so does Whitehorse, and so I stopped bragging about that at least, and I felt like I was blessed to be in a situation where I had to speak to mom and dad a lot, so the conversation probably was a little elevated in terms of my age, my vocabulary may have been improved because of the fact that I was speaking to adults and not to peers. But yeah, loved seeing the country, and it's ironic. Tara Sloan and I ended up on that Rogers hometown hockey
I
circuit,
know.
and it so
Mm.
reminded me of my youth, reverting to a lot of experiences. And you don't want to be on the air saying, I used to live here, and I know what this is all about, because nothing worse than a laurel pat on the head. But anyway, it did remind me a lot of my childhood when Tara and I crisscrossed the 160 communities we hit in 8 years. Crazy.
Unbelievable. And that show was so incredible. Just seeing, the things you guys were able to get out of the communities and also give back to the communities and just kind of put them on the map and kind of give them their opportunity to have a little moment of fame and be just proud of what they do in their small little town. Just why don't you tell me a few stories about hometown hockey? I mean, it was such an iconic show, and I think it was such a heartfelt show and something that, so many of us connected to because like you said, it's the heartbeat of every little community around the country.
Well, I
Is there
think,
any other
Chris,
way you could explain it? Yeah.
you're a teacher, so I think you come by your curiosity. Honestly, I think the greatest gift that we have is our curiosity. And that show was about that, but not everybody's like that. A lot of people just want to talk about the hockey, talk about the betting line, talk about whatever, the inside scoops. This was not that. This was,
Mm.
this was for me like a show way back in the day called Wide World of Sports with Jim McKay, which went round the world and would teach you, what the big sport in Kennedy Town, Hong Kong is, or what the big sport in Belfast, Ireland is. Uh, and I loved it. I was a child, like living vicariously through this telecast. That's how I saw the world. It's the way people read. They read to have the experience that they'll probably never have themselves. So that show started in London, Ontario, and I remember vividly Eric Lindros, who you've had on the across the pond. He was so good to us, Chris. He did 3 different days. He dedicated to helping us build that first show. We went and toured his boyhood home and where his father worked. We went to the Victoria Park Arena where he played his first hockey, to Victoria Park itself and walked about, and then he came, live to the show. He and Keena came down, and I mean, that's big, right? To have Eric Lindros kind of certified the show as at least on a plane with not necessarily Hockey Night in Canada's brand, but the fact that you were doing a legitimate big time show. And we ran a feature that night on a young goaltender who had perished in a crash. And you could have heard a pin drop. It was just so great, the buy-in from the crowd. It was a crowd outside of our mobile studio, and they were watching this feature on the goaltender, Joey, and just really into it. So that was a sign that, okay, this can work. And I give, Tara and Jennifer Botterill was a big part of the initial year. Then she went to work for the Islanders for a couple before returning. And then Tara's, interviewing her willingness to put herself out there and try silly things. She was a Olympic rower in one segment in Victoria, BC. Not easy. It's hard to keep those boats upright. So that it was just a great and I think in every town, like we went to Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland. For me, out of Toronto, I would do Saturday night hockey night in Canada, and then board a plane Sunday morning, fly from Toronto to Halifax, Halifax to St. John's to Gander. I'm 3 flights in already, and then drive 90 minutes over into Grand Falls, Windsor. And I thought, what the hell are we going to talk about in Grand Falls, Windsor, Newfoundland? But of course, it's the home of the first NHLer that came from Newfoundland. Alec Faulkner's just around the corner, Bishops Falls. And the team there won the Allen Cup that year. And John Scott was their play-by-play guy, and he was fantastic. He was like Bob Cole incarnate. So it ended up, and the mayor, Barry Manuel, I always want to call him Manilow, Barry Manuel, he put on a little shindig after the show that was, great buffet and music, and everything about the experience was worth. I'd have flown 7 times to get there had I known.
Well, it's funny you mentioned having a guy like Eric back your show and kind of give you the boost to kind of get it on the map. Sometimes the public perception of people is so far off from the way people actually truly are. And I think your show did a really fantastic job of doing that. And a guy like Eric, who graciously gave me an opportunity to talk to him and interview him, like I was so impressed. And I mean, like he had no need to do that.
Right.
And there's so many stories and so many people out there in the hockey world that are just genuinely good people. And I think that's what hometown hockey really meant to me.
Well, you had Robbie Shrimp. He came over again, like is enigma the right word? I mean, so bloody talented.
Oh my God.
Probably way ahead of his time, had the rules opened up the game for Robbie, he probably would have been a wonder at the NHL level. But regardless, had a fine career in the game. And everybody looks up to him, and that's you're right. There's those stories. Like I remember having Michael Ryder on and Darren Langdon. Langdon's hysterical.
Yeah, of course.
So we got them on. This was Hockey Night in Canada, actually. It was to promote Hockey Day, a show that we do. We try to confuse everyone with Kraft Hockeyville, Rogers Hometown Hockey, Scotiabank Hockey Day. We have a million different grassroots initiatives. But Langdon and Ryder were on with me together, and Michael Ryder says, "Hey, Darren, I hear you had Ron at your bar in Deer Lake. How'd that go?" And he says, "Oh, not too good." He said, "Ron only had 1 beer and he didn't leave a tip." Which was not true. It was funny, right? And that shone through in the show. Everybody always wanted to go to their hometown and help. There was no trouble getting guests for Rogers Hometown Hockey. The players like Colin Campbell's a senior vice president of the NHL, director of hockey ops. His town's Tillsonburg, Ontario, and I mean, again, he would have driven back and forth 22 times to make that show sing. And everybody wanted that for their town, to recognize like John Batchelor's the U18 AAA coach in Burnaby, and John Goyens rather is the Lions coach, the U18 AAA team and outside Montreal. Every town had that Scotty Bowman or Glenn Sather at that level, and we get them on TV, and it was just like, again, unfortunately, I've lived this too, where the Calgary Stampede is the biggest thing going when we're in there doing the Stampede in Calgary, but Toronto doesn't care. And when the Molson Indies in Toronto, Calgary doesn't care. And, there was that element that we were battling the whole way. It was a huge hit in the town we were in, but did it play on the national stage? I'm not so sure.
Right. Well, you did mention, I do want to give a shout out to my pal, Rob Shrimp, who, someone who I look up to and someone who, really helped me, inspire me to get back into coaching last year, and got an opportunity to work with him, which was beyond exciting for me and such a great experience. But one of the questions I was going to ask you later, like, yes, he seemed like a guy who was ahead of his time. Is there anyone in the game now that's ahead of their time?
Well, I mean, Bedard, he's already passed it on to Macklin Celebrini, like not to spoil the first show of Hockey Night in Canada, but I
Yeah.
thought it was uncanny this summer that McDavid and Bennett played for the Stanley Cup. They played Game 7 for the Stanley Cup. Sam Bennett of really
Hmm.
Holland Landing is 7 minutes out of Newmarket, but they grew up together in Newmarket playing mini sticks and minor hockey. And the dream, they used to dress in separate bedrooms at the McDavid household and come out of there, put on the national anthem, and then play mini sticks. And now these guys play for the Stanley Cup, and one gets to shake the hand of another and say congrats, and the other one gets to hoist the cup. And it's just like, that's Newmarket, Ontario. And then you have Bedard was drafted a year ago. A year later, Macklin Celebrini, same place, North Vancouver, drafted #1 overall. You had Nate McKinnon hoist the Hart Trophy, which, of course, Sidney Crosby just signed his new 2-year deal. He's Cole Harbour. There's two guys from Cole Harbour. Can't be two, players of a generation from the same little town, but there are. And it's amazing to see how that belief lifts talent when, so Schremp for me was like Marner, and certainly Connor Bedard. The hands, the game used to be about speed was the intimidation, but now it's hands, and that's why Kevin Bieksa always says like he had more trouble almost with Eichel than McDavid. McDavid can fly, and certainly Connor can do it all, but he said the deception in Eichel's game for Kevin as a defender was off the charts. And that's what Robbie had. Robbie was,
Yeah.
super deceiving with his hands. So I think the game has shifted. Excuse me. Funny enough, when Crosby was on with Elliott and Kyle Bukauskas just last week in Vegas at what they call the car wash, so the players get moved through all these interviews, he said, I think I can play to 40 now. And he says, and the game's great. And he says, and it's physical. We haven't lost that edge. He said the game is shifting, but we haven't lost that edge, and that's Crosby. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And I think, you could talk to anybody that's played. Part of what they're proud of is that to do it in traffic, to do it in battle, that's the gift. We could all stick handle in our bedroom, but can you stick handle when there's bodies flying this way and the other? So yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly one of Sid's gifts and something that he's been able to, model for a lot of young players, I think. And I remember one time sitting with Shrimpy and he was explaining to me how he saw the game of hockey. He explained it as he sees it in 3 dimensions, 3 different levels. There's the ice surface level. There's what's going on here. There's what's going on up here. He's like, I see 3 guys here. I know there's an opening here. I know I can draw them in. It was just like, yeah, there's guys that see the game on a different level, and that's not something that you teach.
No, that Luke Gazdic is now on Hockey Night in Canada, former player, and he played. He was Connor McDavid's first roommate, and it was the same thing. They sat on the couch in the basement and watched a goal that McDavid had scored, and then Connor, explained to him, "Well, I knew that if there's 3 guys there, there can only be 2 there, and that means there's open ice
Yeah.
here." And he says, "And the skate blades are turned this way, so that guy that's over there is not staying in that zone. He's coming to me." So all that processing, it's very, I assume it's like they teach fighter pilots, to be at the speed of an aircraft, to not fly behind the plane. We all fly behind the plane when we play. I honestly, Chris, I don't know how you are, but all my young life in hockey, I used to think, God, Ron, I thought you were a fairly, bright kid, but you just don't see the ice. Like, what is the matter with you? Why can't I read the game the way the good ones do? And that always frustrated me, that I clearly have a blind spot that's my aeronautical engineering mind, despite 2 parents in the Air Force, just didn't
Yeah.
happen.
Well, to be honest, like I said, I don't know if that's it. It's something that, you can work on that kind of thing, but you'd either have that or you don't. There's
I
guys
agree.
that
Yeah.
see the ice and see the game differently. You can have all the skills in the world and skate with your head down. Like, it's just, there's so much to the sport, and it's why it's the best sport on the earth, because it's so fast and decision making is so quick.
I always tell the story of being in Torino at the Olympics in 2006, and I was sitting with Walter Gretzky. Wayne was over with Steve Tambellini, and I think Kevin Lowe was there at that part. So they had just lost 2-0 to Russia, and they're out of the Olympics, and they end up in our little bar, Camillo's, by our hotel in Torino. And Wayne said, "We needed Niedermeyer." We definitely needed
Yes.
Scott Niedermayer. We'd have been okay,
Yeah.
but they weren't. So now Walter's showing me, he's got, Wayne used to watch Hockey Night in Canada and he would track the puck all over the
Yeah.
ice. As the puck moved around, he would do that. And Walter thought it was so that Wayne had a sense of where the puck is most concentrated.
Mhm.
But it's not that. Wayne said, no, Ron, I was working on my peripheral vision. I wanted to see if I could keep the pen on the page and keep the puck in the spot, while looking up there. So I was forcing my eyes
Wow.
to expand my field of vision. Yvon Cornwallier did the same thing, he said, as a boy. He would put the TV, he would slide it an inch to the left, then another inch to the left, and he kept hoping that he could see the game clearly when the screen was now over here. So guys do find, and for sure, when Wayne was a boy, Walter hung Javex bottles for him to skate around. So back to Robbie Shrimp's, three
Yeah.
tiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are ways that you can improve the skill set, but
Right.
I have to believe some of it's innate, and the psychology, like I refereed for years as you did,
Yeah.
never felt anxiety once. Well,
Mhm.
shouldn't say. I mean, my legs felt like venom sometimes. I was so nervous, but never felt anxiety. Never felt a panic attack coming on while
Mhm.
just reacting. Right? Refereeing doesn't
Yeah.
allow for dwelling. You're just trying to keep afloat. Whereas in broadcasting, I would have many moments of working myself into a frenzy.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I've heard that story about Wayne Drawn, and I always thought it was because he was trying to see the most common patterns as well on the ice. But that is
Right.
incredible.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
it was an eye test. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That makes sense, I guess. So, yeah, on to one of our other connections, Ron, refereeing. How old were you when you got the bug or got the urge to start reffing?
So luckily, the same guy, a gentleman named Bernie Roth, got me into broadcasting, got me into refereeing. So we had a high
Okay.
school radio station. We would spin records at noon hour. Bernie was one of the DJs, as was I. And then he was sick one day, so he phoned his boss and said, call Ron to come down to the radio station. Because now Bernie was actually working as an operator at a local radio station in Red Deer, Alberta. So I got the call to go down there. And then as soon as I got a little bit into it and they put me on the air, they allowed us to read the news at midnight. And eventually they got me to spin records while I was in grade 11 and 12. And I was kind of worried, Chris, back in the day, we didn't wear visors, let alone full masks. I thought I might get clipped, with a stick in the teeth, and develop a speech difficulty or an impediment that would be hard on my radio work.
Hmm.
So Bernie says, you should ref, Ron. I'm starting up refereeing. And that's what happened in 1979, 78, 79 season. I went down and got registered and became a referee, and then I got that bug. Much like I've told you off air, I wanted to be a teacher was my goal in life. But these two pursuits, refereeing and DJing's different for young people listening now. It's not turntable, hip hop. It's art. Personality radio is what I would, the person on the radio who's spinning the records and announcing, that kind of a DJ. And I did a little bit of each, and both involved making someone's day. I think at core, that was, if I'm elevating the game and allowing the players to shine, that's good. And if I'm waking you in the morning with it's going to be sunny and 30 degrees today, and here's a great song by Spandau Ballet, feel good. Get on with it. Those were
Yeah.
great vocations that prevented me from being a teacher because I ended up just staying on that wavelength.
Well, very connected professions. And yeah, you did a lot of reffing. Are you still on the ice now doing some and are
Just playing.
just
My
playing?
eyes. Two things happened, Chris. The 2006 lockout that wiped out the entire NHL year, so it went over 04, 05 really.
Hmm.
That was a tough year for me to ref because I was constantly being called to go down to New York and interview Bettman or over to Detroit or Toronto to get good and know. We were doing a thing called Movie Night in Canada. We had no hockey to broadcast, so Mike Dodson, a producer, and myself were tootling around Canada, and it was almost like Rogers Hometown Hockey ahead of the time.
Hmm.
We would go to a minor hockey setup and interview kids and play movies on a Saturday night. Excuse me, that's first thing in the morning for me.
Yeah, no problem.
So
Yes, we
so
do
we
have
did
to
that.
mention it. It's
Yeah,
7:30 a.m. for Ron right
that's
now.
right. So I'm not a morning guy. But we were, I had no control of my schedule. Referee, as you know, is normally able to submit, here are 15 dates that I could work
Hmm.
in the month of October, but I had no control. So I got out of it that year after 23 years and just didn't go back. Then we morphed into the two ref system. So it was all going to be a big change. And I thought, I'll play. And so now I play tonight. I'll play at 7:30, and Wednesday nights I play at 9:30. The Tuesday night is a league they call the Adult Safe Hockey League, and we
Right.
play anywhere from 6 in the evening to midnight.
Wow.
Whereas Wednesday night is set 9:30 each Wednesday night. And it's,
Well,
I go for the beer and the conversation after. That's kind of where I get my education each week on what's
yeah,
really going on in hockey.
that's true. Yeah, there's a lot of opinions in that dressing room, I imagine.
Yeah. We're
Yeah,
proud we got new
yeah,
sweaters, Chris. We're going to get
yep,
Hockey Day in Canada, which is a show I mentioned. Scotiabank
yep.
sponsors once a year this year. It'll be in Canmore, Alberta. But we're going to be newly kitted in the beautiful red and black and white sweaters of Hockey Day in Canada. So don't know whether we'll call our team Hockey Days properly spelled or DAZE, or we'll have to debate that over a cold one tonight.
Yeah, good idea. Ron, you mentioned battling anxiety a little bit, and that's something I wanted to pick your brain about because often talked about now, but in the past wasn't. I've heard you
Mhm.
mention on a few podcasts or a few interviews before that you would get anxious before big interviews or big events that you were covering, and I certainly feel that as well. Like even coming here to talk to you tonight, like I get my mouth gets dry. I'm like, well, pacing around. Like, how did you have any advice on or any tips or anything you would do to deal with your anxiety?
Well, honestly, Chris, I think age is what finally kind of cured it for me. And I always knock on wood because, God knows that feeling will come on at a whim. But I don't get it much anymore. I'm not as concerned with making it or proving
Mm,
myself as I used to be. So when I hit about 35, I think is when it finally subsided. But literally from the time I was 17, and I often feel bad telling this story because if you're a teenager and you've got 20 years of this in front of you, it's kind of deflating. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a professional psychologist or doctor. So, but for me, I think the way I solved it was to get out of myself, to really put my mind and spirit into, I'm here for Chris, not
mm,
me. I'm
right.
here for the listener, not me. And what can I do to elevate that person? And what can I do to elevate this scene? Which is often to shut up. That taking that pressure off. How do I look? How do I sound? How's my diction? How am I stumbling on a word? Who cares, really, if you stumble on a word? But you kind of build yourself into worrying about such a thing, and yeah, that's dwelling, and it's Kelly, Rudy, and I talk. Kelly's still 63, like, or 64 now. No, he'll turn 64 in January. But battling it, right? It's a
Yeah.
looping concern that you don't measure up, that you're not good enough, and it's weird how that can play on your mind, and it shouldn't. But with all these potential put downs on social media and such, you could easily see why a person would be having that bout of insecurity, and it just is a matter of getting out of all that and into who and why are you doing what you're doing. And if you do that, I think that's like I say, now I've been 30 years where I feel like I don't feel that, but I still, Chris, like for me, one of the weird times for me always is the end of the Stanley Cup. The panel sitting there, and I've got 3 minutes to wrap the show, and it's commercial break, and I'm waiting. And in that commercial break, which can be 3 minutes long, it starts to build like, oh God,
Mhm.
do I really have this story whittled down so that I can execute it in 3 minutes? Because it's live, and I've got certain bits of business I have to attend to, and certain points I want to hit. Almost every 30 seconds, I'm going to change the story to move it to another direction, and I worry. I
Yeah.
feel that build and that anxiety start, but it doesn't come in a panic attack. That's the big difference. So when it was a panic attack, I literally couldn't function. I literally would shut down, because my heart was racing so badly. I couldn't breathe. And I've had that, walking onto the set of the NHL awards. Imagine, a full theater, and, here's Ron MacLean's big grandiose introduction. And it's like, oh God.
Yeah.
But I got through it. I usually crack a lame joke and hope that little murmur or laughter would buy me enough confidence to get
Yeah.
through it. And you do learn, and this again is advice for if you're experiencing anxiety attack, persevere. Try to keep going, because it will calm down. It has
Right.
to. It can't stay at that fight or flight for long. So yeah,
Yeah,
get out of
that's
yourself and keep going.
that's really good advice, Ron. My wife talks to me about that a lot, about just being present, being in the moment. listen and respond. Remember why you're doing this. Nobody cares I don't care how many people are listening. I do this because I want to meet and connect with interesting people. And when I first started, I used to have scripts of like 8 pages of questions, and oftentimes you're just waiting to ask the next question.
Right.
And it shows in your performance, it shows in your execution, and not being present, and it really takes away from the experience. And then afterwards, you're like, what just happened?
But the hard part about that, Chris, is I find like some days I'm just firing on all cylinders and my reaction speed is great. And other days I'm thick and I don't know why, but I'm just, so I rely on my prep as a backup. I
Mhm.
have that 8 pages just in case I'm just not with it that day. You can't, a no successful conversation can be about moving it to the next subject matter because you want to.
Mhm.
You're whoever you're chatting with has to kind of help dictate that. So you're right to listen and be in the moment is absolutely key. It's just it's human nature to be I don't know if it's biorhythms or what accounts for that, but I just feel like even McDavid or even Crosby may not see the ice on a night. They'll see it
Right.
9 out of 10, but there's going to be those days, and that just comes with it though. That's like I was doing an event in Winnipeg the other day, and I told a joke that I wished I hadn't. It was just the circumstance was such that it could have been construed as insensitive.
Right.
I was just being flip, and I was kind of in the moment and just being Ron, but you can't afford to just be Ron.
Mm.
There's two. That's the biggest change in everything has been the epiphany that you don't get to decide if the joke is funny. The listener decides if the joke is funny. That there's a whole
Right.
new kind of enlightenment about how we communicate. Like I was shocked when Angela James, who I think the world of, she said there's too much banter in the dressing room. And it was like, oh, wow, one of the greatest players of all time is just saying,
Yeah.
there's too much of that, it's because it's loose, right? And it's
Right.
careless.
Yeah.
And it's a hard balance because you need the levity to kind of lighten the load, but you need that sensitivity to be able to be inclusive, period.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've got firsthand experience dealing with that. And something
Do
you've
I
talked
ever?
about.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. So something you've talked about many times. And, just for my listeners, when you look back now at what happened with Don, and, how you reacted to it, or how the situation played out, any regrets or anything that look back and
Well,
say, I wish I could have done this a little differently, or,
my biggest regret, Chris, was we had to do the apology. Like, so it was a Saturday night that it happened.
hmm
And then I had Rogers Hometown Hockey in Welland on the Sunday. And we were shooting early in the morning with Paul Bissonnette.
hmm
And I was kind of back, and Paul was part of this, back and forth to Don on the phone. And I'm saying, yeah, but Don, we got to apologize. We were wrong. He's, no, you do what the bleep you want. I'm not. And there was no chance for me to go over to his house and really walk through what was happening, like because
right.
it was at a time, Chris, especially elevated time. It was right at the heart of Black Lives Matter, of truth and reconciliation, of hashtag Me Too. There were social advances happening at warp speed, and we were caught in a little bit the swirl of that. Even though we had an 86-year-old, well understood, we were all in hockey. We're kind of in on the joke that this guy
Yeah.
is, he's about these kinds of ethics that are not necessarily in lockstep with the new advances in society.
hmm
But the joke doesn't stay within the fraternity with social media. It moves
Right.
outside of that. And then the pressure to bear on, gatekeepers is enormous. So that's a regret that I was working Sunday. And, had we sat down Sunday together, I think I could have finessed that. Um, I have no regrets about my position. I did feel we were wrong. It sounds like an innocent mistake, but it was projecting an attitude on somebody simply because of where they're from, and can't do it. You just can't. So you
Yeah.
have to just quickly say sorry
Yeah.
and move on. I mean, everybody would have. It wouldn't have even been an issue with a quick apology. But that Don's, absolutely always felt sorry is a sign of weakness,
hmm
and nobody's going to accept your apology anyway. So
Yeah.
he it was against his nature to apologize, and I knew I couldn't change that.
Right.
And then the actual messaging of why we needed to correct it. I mean, what am I here for? I love Don, but I
Yeah.
also, have my beliefs, and I couldn't look in the mirror and, go along, as they say, to get along, on that one. And I didn't, I really did want to kind of step down from the show. I thought long and hard about that. And then I thought, oh, but then what kind of a message is there's a woman, Feminista Jones is a queer
Hmm.
black woman living in Toronto. She's from America, but she's living in Toronto now. And she was on CBC radio one day and she says, don't call yourself an ally, because the minute the going gets tough, you'll retreat to your privilege. You'll move away from the crosshairs. And I thought, I can't leave. I'm going to, pay a horrible price for this, police protection, people mad at me, the whole bit.
Yeah.
But that's what I believe in. I have to gut it out, and it's 5 years down the line, it's not gone away. It's not one of those you
Right.
can just quickly, Perdita Feliciano, we said in her book, when she fell during the Olympics, so my world is like, there's this axis, everything before I fell at the Olympics and everything after I fell at the Olympics. And that's a little bit, again, the trouble we get into, internalizing and dwelling about ourself and our,
Mm.
taking stock of ourself.
Yeah.
Shouldn't do it, but we do. Why wouldn't we? What else is there to sort of think about? But yeah, that was a defining moment, and yet I have no regrets about what I did. I just feel
Yeah.
bad that I might have been able to talk Don down and get us through that and have it
Yeah.
end, much more graceful. Because it's unfortunate. You just, two friends, and we are still
Yeah.
friends.
Hmm.
He's going through a really tough time. Cindy, his daughter, passed in July, so I know for Don this is a really difficult stretch, and hard not to be there for him more. But yeah, Don's a strong guy, as you know.
Oh, absolutely. And, I'm certainly glad that you didn't make that decision to step away because you would have been sorely missed. And yeah, again, something that's, it is what it is. And you hit the nail on the head there. It's different guy, different personalities. And this is the fallout. And what can you do about that?
That's right. You have to live your life, right?
Yeah.
And you have to have your set of. And I think honestly, Chris, being a referee or being a teacher,
Mm.
not to say Don isn't that, because Don was a coach.
Yeah.
So but I always go. Brian Stevenson wrote a book called Mercy, and it's about a lawyer who worked in the on death row. It was sort of a not-for-profit organization that represented prisoners who were on death row who didn't have the means to defend themselves. It's a fascinating book about ethics, and but he starts with a story of a woman whose son is accused of murder, and she said, "Brian, you have to realize you have people who are loved in your care." And I just thought it was such a nice, way to frame it. I think that's what you and I have as teacher, referee, director of hockey operations. You have people who are loved in your care, and what can you do to make it so that it's fair and empowering and loving and all that. That's what we do, and Don did that. So I don't want to, confuse the fact that we would often have our first beer after a show, and Don would say, "Think how many people we made happy tonight." Might have
Yeah.
been, a soldier that he honored. So
Hmm.
there was a lot of that going on. It's just that there was that core, and this is, gosh, I mean, on November 5th, the U.S. election will kind of come down to people who see the world one way and people who see it a different way. And who
Yeah, good.
knows how that'll all shake out. But that is kind of the lesson that, when I started, I was taught, be authentic, uh, tell jokes that are funny to you, speak to someone like you. That will be your sincerity. That will be, your companionship. But as I
Right.
said to you, the dynamic has shifted a little bit where you can't just think about what is funny to you. You have to realize that there were all these other underlying thoughts that you didn't know because you had a blind spot so big based on your simple upbringing, that
Yeah.
uh, you need to think a little more about that. And that really, I mean, Don hated that. No, you can't. We're worried about that. It's and so, and I kind of half agree with that, but I, my this whole library is about ethics,
Yeah.
and I think in the end, we're more in a situation needing to learn than to preach.
Well said. And as a young kid watching you guys together, I always try to take something different out of the relationship that you guys had and how different you were. but it was
Mhm.
always like you could always, if you can come from a place of understanding who that person is, you can always walk away with something.
Right.
And that to me was like, even as a kid, I recognized that. And, I was fortunate enough to have a dad that was, he's really bright and, taught me to listen and to learn and to appreciate the things that people can offer to you. And I thought, everybody always had their favorite, what Ron or Don kind of thing. And we'll get
Yeah.
to that a little later at the end of the show. Kind of funny
I
question
might have
for you,
lost
but
that one, but no, he was so easy to love, right? Like most of it
yeah,
was mischief. Most of it was,
yeah.
he was kind of a carnal, he was the tough guy in the arena. And I loved it. There was a million
Hmm.
things about, our time together that was, and we both miss it. We would sit and we would like literally, we would be having a beer and he'd be, you left wing pinko communist kook, but I didn't
Yeah.
mind. I wanted to be the left
Yeah.
wing pinko
Yeah.
communist kook,
Exactly. Yeah.
so it was just so funny. It was a great 33 years. That's all you can kind of come away with.
Absolutely. And
And
we're
as I
we're
said, we still talk, but not as often as we'd like.
we're all thankful for it, Ron. And
Mhm.
this episode is to me has been a lot about the theme of connections and things that, not necessarily you and I have in common, but the idea of connecting. And there's one more guy that I want to talk to you about because we both share a tremendous passion for, and that's Gord Downie.
Mhm.
Um, Canadian culture. People always ask me like, why is Gord Downie like? What is it about him? Like, why does everyone love him so much? And I've got my answers, and I've been talking about it for a while. But I'd love to hear from you, someone who's experienced him firsthand. What is it about Gord Downie that you love so much?
Well, I have a fond memory of being at Brad Richards' golf tournament. And back to Crosby for a moment. I remember I
Mm.
was out frolicking in Charlottetown, and we had to be on the tee box the next morning. And I was a little banged up from the late night the night before. And Crosby's a rookie; he's not even played in the NHL, but he's attending this golf tournament because of Alan Andrews, the great fitness coach.
Hmm.
Is there in PEI. So Crosby's on the veranda of the golf course, Brudenell in PEI, looking at us offload from the bus. We're all players and myself coming to play in this charity golf tournament. And I had filled my bag with stuffed animals to give to the kids because they come and caddy for us. And I remember Crosby just looking to see how the other players acted. What's Ron doing? He just like an eye to what's going on. And it was just a great moment to see Crosby and his attention to detail and what that would mean ultimately to his career. And he's gone on to become probably our greatest ambassador. Um, but connections, like what was the question, Chris, on connections?
With Gord
Oh,
Downie.
Gord Downie. God, yes.
Yeah.
Um, well, so I'm at that tournament, and then I'm flying back to Dan Snyder Memorial Golf Tournament in Elmira, Ontario. And again, I've had like 1 hour sleep, it feels like, long haul to get to this tournament. And there's Gord Downie coming the other way in a golf cart. and and just the grin, just the way he made you feel. I mean, he was such a gentle, gentle spirit, brilliant musician. I love in his scribblings, he wrote, night takes the chances, day the applause, because he would sit there by the fire writing well into the night. The new documentary, I cannot wait to see.
I know, me too.
Yeah, he understood again. There's a guy that didn't celebrate Canada. He didn't feel we were perfect. He knew
Mhm.
there was much to learn. And I'll tell you, Phantom Power, your band. I was in Nova Scotia when that album broke. And it was a CD that I purchased, brand new Phantom Power CD,
Yeah.
and we were sitting in a little hotel in Halifax again at a charity event, and I was with Glenn Murray and Tony Curry. Who else was there? A lot of alumni for the NHL and or current players, and we listened to Phantom Power for the very first time. And I always loved Vapor Trails, which is the song that when he came out of his surgery, when they first were dealing with his brain cancer, that's the song they didn't know if he'd even know a word, but that's the song he started humming, was Vapor Trails from Phantom Power.
Wow.
I can remember being in St. John, New Brunswick, hearing Little Bones on the radio for the first time. So I can remember being in Buffalo at Mother's Bar and Grill with Daryl Shannon was playing the song Fiddler's Green on the jukebox.
Yeah.
I could take you right across the country. I obviously saw their first of the last tour. I saw their first show in Victoria, and then introduced the final show from
Yeah.
Copacabana Beach in Rio de Janeiro at the Olympic Games. And what a crazy situation that was, to watch the first doc that came out and to see Gord Downie saying, I got to just remember two words. If I can just remember two words, and those words were First Nations. So yeah, just a gift to us all. And but mostly I remember when you needed a pick me up, that was Gord. He was just gentle and he could lift.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's just it's really hard to explain to people who either aren't Canadian or, never really got the opportunity to listen to his music. I'll tell you a quick story, Ron. I was playing softball here, and we were doing the gigs with Phantom Power, and people were talking about it. And this old guy, he's an older guy, was probably in his 50s, but still played in the league. He was kind of one of the old crew, right? And he came up to me and said, "What's going on about this Phantom Power?" And he's an American guy. And he said, "What's going on with this band?" And I said, "Oh, it's a Canadian band. Everyone loves them. Canadians are excited. The lead singer just passed away from cancer. And we're kind of just doing a tribute to the band." And he said, Send me one of their albums." And he looked it up on YouTube. And the first thing that came up was the last show. So we watched the last show first. And he comes back the next Saturday to softball, and he says, "You know what? I couldn't stop watching that concert." He said, "My eyes wouldn't leave the screen. I felt so drawn in." And so he told me about that, and then he said, "What do I do next?" I said, "Go back to Tragically Hip, Go back to where it started, and start giving it a listen from the beginning." And a few weeks later, we find out that this guy had cancer himself and didn't tell anybody. And for some reason, he fell in love with Gord. He felt connected to him. And I was going to say, like, the first time I saw him live, I loved him as on the radio or on a CD. But when I saw him live, it was over. Just
Right.
something
Charismatic, unbelievable.
Yeah, that you can't explain. So Gord's touched a lot of people around the world.
There's a performance of a song called Hey Maria by Andrew Cash and Gord Downie. It was the Kumbaya Festival, 1993. And for me, it's the best Downey of all. He go through 1,000 concerts and how great he was, and just those non sequiturs and his incredible, when he would take a song and open it up, everything about it just like captivating. But if you ever see that one, Hey Maria, and just
I'm
see
writing it down.
the grace of Gord performing someone else's music. So he has actually, ironically, he has the words written on a piece of paper, but he's singing with Andrew Cash, who's a politician here in Toronto, whose son Sam is a great musician, Sam Cash. But yeah, when I see that performance of Hey Maria, I just say, wow, that's Downey at his zenith.
I'm gonna look that song up right after this. Just got a couple more for you, Ron. I know you're a busy man. You have a lot going on in your life, and so the broadcasting, the job of broadcasting and sportscasting has evolved so much, and you've been involved in it for a long, long time. What do you think is in store for the future of broadcasting, and what kind of like changes do you see, either good or bad?
Well, I mean, the obviously the Amazon Primes, the Netflix, YouTube, the providers will probably be different. Will be more of a streaming service. I still think you need to gather around the television for the Super Bowl or the Stanley Cup, so that's not going to change. You will need a main platform around which society can kind of gather. The job itself, like for me during the pandemic, I got to hooked on because of Crosby again. Sidney said, he was asked by Colby Armstrong, "What are you watching during the pandemic?" Because none of us could do anything. He said, "I'm watching Yellowstone and I'm watching Formula One Drive to Survive." So Carrie, my wife, got hooked on that show, and then I got hooked on their broadcasts when they do Sky Sports, the F1 car racing. Martin Brundle walks up and down the grid, before the race, and I just think their accessibility or access is impressive. But I often wonder, like, I don't know how you feel about this, but like we saw the Oilers after they lost. Did you see that social media post of the dressing room? They
Yes.
went into so the Oilers are all just sitting there. There's not a word being said. Devastated. And I thought, is this good that I'm seeing this? That access. I know it's you feel kind of privileged to be able to get that glimpse, but in a way, there's something about that almost should have not been ours to witness. But yeah, I don't think. I mean that Mozart and Shakespeare and all the greats will be relevant as long as the sound and the story survive. So I don't think it's going to fundamentally change. It's just where you get it, whether you're
Right.
sort of watching on your phone as we do now or on a big screen. And I think, players are clearly, on the one hand, they're more inclined to do things with you because they have their own Instagram and so forth. But I also think you can see that shutdown going on, like it's kind of a contrived presentation that we need to leap past. And I think that the way we get past it might be to eliminate some of it. I think there's a little bit of a vortex that we're in right now where there's just a few too many ways we get at the story that I think interferes with just the story itself. But that kind of goes to Robbie Schremp's 3 tiers. Like if I could see those, on the broadcast horizon, that would be value. My sort of tendency is to steer, like Mark Twain, is to kind of steer clear of the education that will interfere with what I know. So how do you make that determination? How do you have a discriminating palate? Not sure. I'll figure that one out.
You will. I'm sure you will. I think I agree with you about, I love watching it all access behind the scenes, seeing how it makes players tick and kind of, the preparation that goes into things. And that's all good. And yeah, I think it's all fine when it's planned and that kind of thing is like, we're going to make a documentary or something like that. But to me, like you just mentioned, in the dressing room after a game, there's something sacred to that. There's something, to me, I don't think analysts or anyone should be allowed into a dressing room. I think there's a reason there's a symbol on the floor. There's a reason why it means so much to people. Like you even mentioned, like, what are you going to hockey for tonight? You're going to go in the dressing room and shoot the shit with your friends and have a good time. That's sacred. And I think that's getting a little bit lost. I don't think it's going to come back. The all access and every day people getting into that and seeing those things, the raw emotions and stuff. I mean, it's intriguing and it's it makes for good TV, but I'm not a huge fan of it.
It's kind of like rubbernecking at a car crash, when the traffic slows down to see the carnage. It's like, really? Is that what we want? No, we didn't, but we can't help ourselves. So I think it's in that church. And I couldn't agree more. And I like how you phrased that. I think that, they've earned the right to have the logo in the center of the room. That's theirs. That's the gift that they've attained. So, but anyway, we won't stop, those probing eyes. That's kind of human nature.
Absolutely. Ron, before I get to the last little segment, I think we should talk for a few seconds. I don't want to end on something sad, but the hockey world lost 2 amazing human beings a few weeks ago. Just tragic, and such a, I don't even know the words to describe it. Just tragic. Any experiences or quick story you could tell us about Johnny and something you'll remember about him?
Well, my connection is Sean Monahan, who just signed with Columbus in order to play with Johnny. Loves him. So Matthew, obviously
Yeah.
Our hearts go out to the story, as we all know, was so devastating at so many levels that it was almost hard to believe. But you just hope that the love is coming at that family will somehow give them some strength to deal with it. Johnny's impact on Sean Monahan. First of all, we were doing a charity event together, Sean and I told a story about how Monahan, Goudreau, and Lance Boma were living together and broke curfew or something. And coach found out, so he benched them for the next night. They were healthy scratch. And Sean said, and I told that story, and then Sean said, and Ron, you didn't tell this part. That was the first time my father was going to see me play in the Calgary Flames uniform in Calgary. and I was benched because we were up to no good. But I flew from Calgary to Toronto to Tampa for the All-Star game one year, just me and Goudreau. And, everything you've heard about his humility, his decency, his whimsy, it's all there. He just, he loved the game. It was such a natural that I think, when Michael Backlund, the coach of the Calgary Flames, spoke at the eulogy out in Calgary, or the service, he said he would always say, hey, Bax, ask the coach for a day off tomorrow, or Bax, come on, have a beer. You can have one. I just think he was so vulnerable. Yeah, he just seemed like such a superstar that was unimpressed with himself. Yeah, really sad. And I think of Sean Monahan. Right away I reached out to Sean to, the people who loved Johnny are, just right through hockey, everywhere he's been. I saw Jim Montgomery in Winnipeg at an event I did last week, and coach of the Boston Bruins had him at junior level. And I said, did you know he'd be that great? He said, oh yeah, but he said he was 130 pounds when he came into the NHL. And I was worried that at 130 pounds, if he got rocked, it could be trouble, but he never did. He said, he's just he's got Robbie Shrimp vision. He's got that ability to avoid that. So just, loved by everyone. And I know a few people in that Columbus organization really well. I started my career working with John Davidson. And obviously Sean Monahan lives, like, their house is up for sale now here in Oakville, Ontario, but he's just 2 blocks away and I see him all the time, and a really nice spirit to Sean Monahan. So they'll have in Columbus, they'll have a kindred, whether they realize it or not. They'll have a kindred suiting up for them this season who will honor. And you saw what Cole Caulfield did. He's going to wear his 13. So yeah, that just shows you the respect is so deep. And hopefully all of that, when we would do the coach's corner, Chris, and Grapes would say something about a fallen soldier. I mean, it meant a lot. It seems, like can't possibly fix anything, and it doesn't, but it meant a lot. And I think the love that's being shown Matthew and Johnny must mean a lot, and hopefully will be, helping in a really, really tough time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Ron. And yeah, rest in peace, Johnny and Matthew. It's they'll gone but not forgotten for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ron, I end the podcast with a segment I call Overtime. I've been asking the same 10 rapid fire questions for 5 years. We're going into 6 years now. So basically, I'm going to give you 2 options, and you're going to just say the first thing that comes to your mind without thinking. And there'll be one final question at the end just for you. All set?
I'm ready.
All right. Habs or Leafs?
Leafs.
Lemieux or Gretzky?
Gretzky.
Probert or Domi?
Probert.
Waugh or Brodeur?
Waugh.
Or Lidstrom?
Or
Claude Lemieux or Brad Marchand?
Brad Marchand, for sure.
Yzerman or Messier?
Mess.
Bowman or Burns?
Bowman.
Ron or Don?
Yeah, that'll be a Don.
Shootout or no shootout?
I like shootout.
And finally, one last one for you, Ron. Is there one sporting event that you haven't covered but always wanted to?
Yeah, I would say the Masters. It could be
Mm,
the British Open as well, but I love when I did golf, Chris, it was one of the joys to do golf. The stakes didn't seem so high. There weren't Leafs and Habs fans yelling at us. It's just I'm really looking forward to Mike Weir's running the President's Cup, the Team International. He had a sit down in Palm Springs. Mike Barnett organized this. So Mike had to pick the team. He had to pick the 6 players that would augment his team for the what is kind of a Ryder Cup format, but it's internationals
hmm.
against US. And so they sat down with Weir, Glenn Sather, Cliff Fletcher, Mike Babcock, and Doug Risebrough to discuss what it's like to pick a team for the Canada Cup or the Olympics and to not pick
Wow.
one of your team members. So he's been well schooled by 4 great hockey minds. He ended up choosing 3 Canadians to compete in the tournament. But I love golf, and that would be my sport to do. Would be the Masters.
You got to get Weirzy to pull some strings for you.
Yeah, that's right. He's a lefty, a fellow lefty. Do you play golf?
I do. Yeah.
And lefty or righty?
Righty.
Righty, yeah,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Well,
Spend a lot of time on the golf course, Ron. Maybe a little too much.
that's okay.
And we're
Good for you.
spoiled in Cape Breton now. Anytime we go back with
Oh
those new
my
Cabot
God.
Corps, oh,
Yeah.
just
It's
phenomenal.
everybody, when I was young in the business and we would talk at CBC because we would go all over the world. I did, Commonwealth Games in Kuala Lumpur, did both World Track and Field and Olympics in Japan, certainly worked in Australia. So down that way. But the people at CBC all said, bar none, the best place to go is Auckland, New Zealand. Of all the things
Yeah.
they've covered and all the things they've done, that was their favorite. And that has become the story of Cabot Links.
Yeah.
The golf in Cape Breton is considered the new Mecca.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Ron, we did it. I can't thank you enough for making this dream of mine come true. I mean, I've wanted to meet you since I was a young boy, and you're everything I expected and much, much more. To me, you're a man who's armed with will and determination and grace
Mhm.
too.
Good for you. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. Right back
Yeah.
at you.
That was Across the Pond, and that's a wrap.